Hey everybody, I'm Tom Dorsey with Paul Keaton, and we have a special guest today on this podcast, Theodore Modis, Dr. Theodore Modis, who is a physicist who lives in Switzerland. And I want to preface this, Theo, thanks for coming on with us. But I remember a time when I was given your book, Predictions. And it's called Predictions. Society's telltale signature reveals the past and forecasts the future. And it's a kind of cover that draws you in. And when it says forecast the future, I said, okay, yeah, I like those kinds of things. And I read this book, and this book so moved me and changed the way I look at cycles in the world, from plants that grow to flowers to just everything that we do in business, in our life, that I flew my wife to Zurich, Switzerland, to have dinner with Theodore Modis. And we had a wonderful dinner that night, and I remember that in that dinner was a wonderful restaurant. I'd love to go back and do it again, but I just kept my mouth shut and listened, and that was really good. So thank you for coming with us, and we're going to talk about predictions.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'll never forget that move. In fact, you have come. We have had Dr. Modis come to our Broker Institute and talk about two brokers, where they are on their S-curve with respect to their own business, and I think that's an important thing to understand. But let's begin, Theodore, with an introduction to the S-curve. Really, tell me what it is.
Yeah, well, an S-curve is a graphical, visual, if you want, representation of a biological model that describes growth in competition, and is based on the principle of survival of the fittest. For example, like a rabbit population that grows on a fenced-off range. You have a pair of rabbits to begin with, and then if the rabbit litter is 2, let's say, every generation, they become 4, 8, 16, 32, it's exponential for a while. Most populations grow exponentially. They call it population explosion in the beginning. But that cannot continue indefinitely because the capacity of the range to feed the number of rabbits is limited. So as you approach that the number of rabbits on the range, you have constraints. Rabbits are starving, and only the best fit will survive, and then the population will flatten. The evolution of this population will be rising very rapidly, like exponential, and then flattening towards the ceiling. And it's S-shaped. That's why we call it S-curve, because it has the shape of the letter S. And at the end, you have a stable population around the capacity of the field to feed rabbits, with small oscillations there as the rabbits push upwards their numbers, only to find out they cannot survive, and then they fall back, giving the grass a chance to grow. But there's a homeostatic equilibrium at the level of the capacity of the field to feed a number of rabbits. Now, this model is very fundamental, is ubiquitous, because it appears in every situation where there is growth and competition at the same time. You have some S-curve hidden somewhere in there. And it could be product sales, the cumulative number of products sold. They start slowly in the beginning, and then more rapidly, and then they taper off to reach a maximum number as the sales drop to zero. The cumulative number of products follows an S-curve and reaches a ceiling. And the same thing is for a growing organism, like the height of a child, the height of a tree. If you mark at the door the height of the child as it grows, you see that it keeps growing upwards, but then the rate slows down, and eventually it doesn't grow anymore. And if you plot that over time, it's an S-curve, and so is the growth of a company that's growing in competition. And you can, I've generalized in my book, as you remember, on personal achievement, like everything, artists are competing, scientists are competing, so creativity, productivity, personal achievement, they all follow this S-curve. You can even go to more abstract levels of competition. I've generalized to diseases competing for victims, and only the best fit, if I can use this expression, the disease but they follow S-curves as they do this. And ultimately, even accidents, you can argue that all possible accidents exist in theory, and then only the best fit accidents will become realized. Like accidents compete between them, and the ones who become visible and become realized are the ones who had a better chance, who were more capable of becoming realized. Now, this is, I realize, extreme of an extreme description of competition, but if you put the numbers down, it follows. And if you track down the accidents due to cars from the appearance of the automobile until today, you find that they did follow an S-curve. They reached the ceiling around the 30s or so, and from then on, they stabilized. Now, of course, in order to see this S-curve and this stability, you have to be very careful about what you're watching. You have to watch the number of accidents per inhabitant, per citizen, because it's the society that feels the pain, and the automatic control set in place to correct this if it goes too far. So the number I tracked was deadly car accidents per population per year. And that number followed the S-curve and flattened around 24 per 100,000 population per year. And it remained stable over 60 years, over 70 years. It just remained there. I mean, it went a little bit above around the time of, I was in America, around the time of the 60s, where Ralph Nader wrote a book about how unsafe at any speed, how cars were killing people as murderous weapons. That's because that number had creeped up to 27 or 28 per 100,000 per year, as opposed to 24, which is the canonical number. That's a homeostatic level. And then it dropped below, and then people start talking about car accidents. They start talking about nuclear accidents or other accidents, because the number was below what society wants and what society accepts as the optimum level. In fact, accidents have an optimum level.
But you know, Theodore, when you say what society will accept, that's an interesting statement, because it's not that Professor Nader or whatever individual says this is what we'll accept. It's like we are all collectively accept that. It's not something that you can see written in a newspaper, but it's something that society. How would you put that? How would you explain that?
I would say that's the price society is willing to pay in order to have the use of cars. Because if you want to reduce the number of dead of victims from car accidents to zero, it's trivial. You abolish cars from the streets.
Right.
There'll be zero accidents, I guarantee it. But that doesn't pay. Nobody wants that. I mean, that would be a disaster. So society is willing to admit this number to go up to a certain level, and then not above that level, though, because if it goes to 28, then we're not happy with this. So then there's a voice of either environmentalists or some people will blow the whistle that this is too much.
But what's interesting, Theo, is that it's not that number is legislated by anybody.
Not at all. Anybody. Not top-down decision, not conscious decision.
Right.
It's bottom up. That's why society is like an organism that feels, senses, and auto-corrects, so that it has a safeguarding capability.
Dr. Modis, one of the interesting things I know that brokers always gave us feedback on when you spoke to them and when you write to them was not just recognizing that there's a natural progression towards the growth phase of maybe their business or of other things, but also that we all have the ability to start new growth phases. And in fact, in life, that could be one of the most important understandings of all. I was wondering if you could perhaps shed some light on that, on how someone or some process might start a new growth phase.
So you mean
a new curve,
extending the S-curve.
Sure, exactly.
Yes, I mean, this is the typical argument I used to get from marketers, and every time I would present them with this idea, that, but then you're telling us it's finished, and then we'll go home afterwards?
Right.
But no, S-curves have the tendency of cascading. That is, when one finishes, another one will pick up. It's like products succeeding one after the other. One product will follow an S-curve, will complete its cycle, and then the follow-up product will pick up slowly, and then will continue growing for another cycle. So, in fact, S-curves cascade like in a fractal way. and then when that ends, another one begins. It's like every time a new niche opens, it fills with an S-curve, and then it's finished, and then growth is zero there's no growth for a while until the new one picks up. So you alternate between these high growth and low growth periods.
Wouldn't energy fall into that category?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the energy consumption, per capita energy consumption for the last 200 years, you see these three S-shaped steps. The first two are complete. The third one is only now growing, and they're exactly symmetric. The first one was completed around. I have it in front of me right now. The first one was completed around the 20s and 30s, and then the second one picked up after that, and in between there was a lull, there was a low growth period, and that coincides with the Big Depression and all those years. And then there was a big growth in the 60s where energy consumption was growing very fast, and then it stopped again around the 80s and 90s, and it was another lull there, and then it's picking up again now. So if you grow macroscopically and you look from a distance and you see these steps, and you say, well, okay, there's a general trend that goes up, but it wiggles around this trend. You can isolate this wiggle quantitatively, and that's the contractive cycle. You find out that the energy comes in bursts and lows that oscillate with a frequency of 56 years, 56 years.
Okay, that would be the Kondrativ wave concept.
That's right. That's a Kondrativ wave that the Russian economist Kondrativ established from macroeconomic and other monetary variables. But here we have it from units of watts consumed per capita. This is hard physical numbers. This is not numbers subject to speculation or to inflation or to politico-economic tendencies and so on. So it is something that it's hard to argue against because it's based on physical variables. In fact, all S-curves must be applied on physical variables. You cannot apply an S-curve on a price.
Well, Theo, let's go back. Let's go back into energy. I want to talk about that for a second because let's start with animal feed. Now, one of the things that really hits me between the eyes. I love watching all of the political banter back and forth, and it's all politics about what oil is likely to do, and should we be doing solar fusion or solar energy now, or how do we make these battery electric cars and things like that? When really it's a moot point on all of it. It's all posturing. It's all political. If you go back, take us through the S curves. When you go back through the first energy source that we had, which was animal feed, when you had you had to feed the donkeys that pulled the bateaux up and down.
Even before that, we had wood. Before the animals, people were just burning wood, and that was the only source of energy. And then wood started declining because energy feed came in, and then coal took over very quickly. So you have this transition from wood to animal feed to coal to oil to nuclear to natural gas to nuclear and possibly to future energy sources that we don't have yet.
When you think about this, Theo, one of the visions that comes to my mind is when we watch old westerns on television, and you think of there's always some train action, and the fight always starts on the train. And you think back to the day when you're watching the western, and they're feeding the fuel in the locomotive with wood. They're throwing wood in there, and then that changes to they're shoveling coal in there, and then the coal makes the steam. And what's happening here is each energy source is like the wood is reaching its maturation point where it's the most viable energy, and that begins to diminish, and then coal begins to take over from it. And everything that in your book, if you look at this, these are clearly delineated points at which these energy sources will reach their peak and begin declining.
Yes, in fact, there's a direct coupling between primary energy use and means of transportation. As you pointed out, the early trains used wood, and the late trains used oil. In fact, today they use electricity made possibly from nuclear. I don't know, but the typical train is coal. I mean, that's when so when trains were the main means of transportation, coal was the main primary energy, and that's what the coupling was. Trains used coal, even though they started with wood and they went to oil and other things. So similarly, the car is using oil, and that's typical. That's the proper fuel for the automobile. But eventually, as we move from oil to gas, to natural gas, then the automobile will use natural gas. And it's already, some of them, they exist already, some of those. And in fact, eventually, the automobile may use electricity, just the way trains are using it today. And you have this, in fact, airplanes are using the airplane infrastructure, which is the next one after the trains. We had after the automobiles, because the way we transited between coal, oil, and natural gas and nuclear, we also changed infrastructures in transport. That is, railways, cars, automobiles, airplanes, and possibly magnetic levitation trains or hyperplanes, or whatever will come in the future. But and there was one coupling. So the airplanes are burning now gasoline the way trains used to burn wood. That's not the proper fuel for airplanes. The airplane, as an infrastructure, is still fairly young. It's taking over from the car, and eventually it will be based on a fuel that's much more hydrogen-rich, like either liquid natural gas or hydrogen itself. So that would be the proper fuel for aviation that will integrate globe into one village. That is, you'll be able to go from one side of the globe to the other in 70 minutes. Remember the 70 minutes invariant? During a day, should be comfortable with 70 minutes, not more nor less. And if that's what falls into the village.
In other words, in layman's terms, what you're saying is a person every day feels it necessary, not consciously, but maybe subconsciously, to be moving or driving or going somewhere 70 minutes a day.
That's what they do at the end, yeah. Even prisoners walk back and forth in their cells, or they run in the courtyard to catch the quota. Because if you don't get that, you don't feel good. It's not comfortable. Human beings want to be on the move around 70 minutes, independent of culture, independent of geography, independent of time, independent of whether we're modern times or older times. So that's why the means of transportation increases the radius of action.
So you'll go further. So as the means of transportation increases speed, then you will tend to move further. In other words,
that's right.
I may move a person.
The villages were 5 miles in diameter because that's how much you cover in an hour.
So in other words, if a person lived in Washington, D.C., they may take a train and live in Richmond, Virginia, if they were able to make it in 70 minutes up there.
No, Los Angeles has a diameter of about 35 miles, because the average speed on a car is about 35 miles in Los Angeles, and everybody has a car in Los Angeles.
Okay, stop there for a second. You're moving so fast. On average speeds, what's interesting in your book, and one of the things that I've never forgotten, is the average speed that we walk is about 3 miles an hour. The average speed that a car drives is about 30 miles an hour. Let me stop there for 1 second. I bought a new Infiniti a number of years ago, and it has a special odometer that I can look at to see the day that I took it off the showroom floor to the day that I'm looking at it. In other words, could be 5 years later. It gives you your average speed. And you know what the average speed was?
About 30 miles an hour.
You got it. It hit it right on the nose, 30 miles an hour, and I said, my God.
Right.
And then take it one step. Okay, wait, Theo. Let's take it one step further. We walk at 3 miles an hour. The average automobile drives at 30 miles an hour, and the average aircraft flies at 300 miles an hour.
Right.
Why is that? Because the next question would be, what speed will the next mode of transportation be? And the answer has to be 3,000 miles an hour.
That's right, about several Mach. I mean, because that should be the plane, that should be the one that, it's not quite that simple. That is, it's not exactly speed, it's the productivity. That is the load times the speed. So if the load is comparable, then you just go with multiples of speed. But if you have a train that takes 10 times as many passengers as an airplane, then it doesn't have to go 10 times as fast. You can go only 3 times as fast. So it's the productivity, it's the product of payload times speed that has to increase by an order of magnitude between generations of transport infrastructure or means of transportation. If you don't gain a factor of 10 in productivity, you don't have a new means of transportation. You have an improved old one, like the Concorde. The Concorde was improved old technology. It was not a new means of transportation. The new means will be the one that goes either 2-3 Mach, and it has 500 people on it, not just 100 people for... you see, the difficulty with the Concorde was that it used the wrong fuel, and it couldn't cover the distance that it had to cover to bring the advantage of the new technology, of the new means of transportation. To go that speed with the old fuel, the load was too much on gasoline and too little on the passengers. So it couldn't take enough passengers, and it couldn't cover the long range. And all that was because it was using the wrong fuel. If you had hydrogen, liquid hydrogen there, the Concorde could have survived the crisis. It could have done Paris to Australia non-stop, or it could have done these long distances non-stop and prove itself as a unique offer that no other means of transportation can offer.
That's interesting. I used to fly the Concorde quite frequently.
Yeah, I remember.
Man, I love that plane. And when they stopped flying that plane, my heart broke.
That's right. Well, it was a precursor. I mean, they will come back because the productivity has to increase. The speed times the payload has to grow another factor of 10. But it could be maglevs, magnetic levitation trains. If they have 10 times as many passengers, they don't have to go 10 times as fast. I mean, they can go only 500 or 600 miles an hour fast, and there would be a new means of transportation because they would carry so many people.
That clarifies it on that for me. As far as energy, where do you see energy going? Because I know it's on an S-curve, and I just have to laugh when I watch these politicians banter back and forth.
Well, Dr. Modis, there was the cover of The Economist, recently. It was said, nuclear energy, the dream that failed. That was the cover of The Economist. I wonder if you agree with that.
Was it recent or was it older?
No, that was recent. That was just within the past month. Because obviously there's been a bit of a lull after the disaster in Japan last year, but it was interesting how short-sighted some of these curiosities would be.
There's still repercussions of that disaster, but I mean that disaster was only one in one of my success stories, my successful predictions of the first book, predictions that came out in '92, published by Simon and Schuster, was that nuclear accidents will drop. That is, while in the 80s, when the book was being prepared and being published, we used to see about 5 major nuclear accidents in 3 years. I made the prediction that it would drop to about 1 in 5 years. And in the last 20 years, we have watched less than 1 major nuclear accident in 5 years. So my prediction came out correct there. And I'm saying that because the Japanese accident got way too much attention, and what you mentioned about the Economist is probably one of the last remaining reactions to that, because it's clear that nuclear cannot go away. I mean, nuclear is the only chance we have for a future energy source. It has a cycle to complete at a lower rate. That was the problem with nuclear. It was growing too fast. And because it was growing too fast, it was provoking reaction from environmentalists, and it was probably causing accidents because technology would not be able to mature as fast as it was spreading, it was diffusing. So if you look at the graph that I have on this article published on the World, what is it, the name of it? light is beginning to appear in the 70s, notably the onslaught of nuclear energy that comes much too steeply, more than strikes the eye how steep it grows. It's not normal, somebody would say. And in fact, that was what triggered so much reaction. And another smaller deviation, also in the mid-70s, began and maintains, is that the use of natural gas slowed down because the decline of coal did not continue its declining course. I mean, the coal was declining for about 40, 50 years along an S-curve, and from the 70s, mid-70s onwards, it stopped declining, or it's declining much slower. And that is on the expense of energy, of natural gas. So I'm saying all this because it has a repercussion both on the energy that we're using, and environment, of course, and on the transport. As I said earlier, the main fuel for airplanes will be either natural gas or hydrogen, some gas anyway, liquefied, and that will fuel supersonic aircraft like a Concorde and next following generations. But that has been taking place because we see that the consumption of natural gas is lagging, and the consumption of coal is lingering. That's practically a one-to-one. The market share that coal holds on to is coming out of natural gas. So this has to be corrected. I mean, deviations from these natural courses that S-curves describe are usually short-term. I mean, eventually they get absorbed. The corrective mechanisms, like we said earlier, society auto-regulates itself. Eventually they recover. But the problem, of course, is both on the environment because coal is much more polluting than gas is. So by having more coal and less gas, we are polluting the environment more. And while nuclear has slowed down but did not quite stop and should continue at a much slower growth rate, comparable to all the other energies, what they've done in the last 150 years, to complete this cycle, which will be maximum sometime in the middle of the 21st century.
So, Dr. Modis, the long-term trend is just that people will use more energy. People do use more energy.
That cannot be avoided. Because, right. We started a growth cycle on the energy consumption per capita, and that has proceeded already beyond infant mortality. I used to argue that if you watch a natural growth process, i.e. S-curve, if you watch an S-curve and you see that it picked up and it starts growing and it's beyond infant mortality, the infant mortality is when you have 10% of the height. When the tree is only 10% of its final height, it's still vulnerable, but if it's more than 10%, no rabbit can eat it and no kid can break it anymore. And from then on, the tree you can be sure that it will reach the final height. So infant mortality is around 10%. So if you watch a growth process go beyond the 10%, you can be fairly sure that will continue to completion under normal circumstances, of course. Now, the new growth phase of energy consumption, I said that there have been two of them. One that started in the 1800s and the one that started after the Depression, and one that started in the 90s now, 90s and 2000. They have already gone beyond infant mortality. So that growth phase will continue, and if we model ourselves to the previous phases, it will reach a ceiling sometime 50 years later, in the second half of the 21st century.
Well,
until then, we'll be growing.
Right. That's the interesting thing about the energy is people, we are so short-sighted because of politics to posture back and forth, but you won't even find that nuclear will reach its peak until probably 2080 or 2090.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, way past any of us who are probably alive right now listening to this will ever even make it. But it's interesting that even we personally are on an S curve. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart died of old age at, I think, 37 years old. How is that?
Yeah, I was born like 35.
35. Yeah. How
Yeah, well,
that's an interesting concept because we're all on S curves ourselves. We have a little more difficult time trying to figure out where we are on our S curves because we don't do things in a consistent manner like prisoners who commit crimes. You can calculate those and calculate the S curve. Mozart who created music compositions. You can.
But even Mozart Tom didn't have to die because he just didn't have enough of flexibility to adapt himself. He had exhausted the music niche, but he could have done something else. I mean, I don't know, musicology, or he could because look at Hitchcock. He exhausted. Hitchcock has two curves, and when the first one was reach the ceiling, that's the movie making, he began the second one with TV series, and he got himself another cycle of growth on television. Now that's not quite the same medium as full-length features because they don't compete exactly. I mean, it's a funny way competition between movies and.
Go back to Mozart. Let's go back to Mozart and tell me how you create his S curve to know when he's going to reach maturation, and unless he finds something new to do, i.e., extend that S curve, reaching maturation means reaching death.
Well, I plotted the cumulative number of his products. His products were compositions. So I put all the compositions down in a cumulative way on an S curve, or on a graph as a function of time, and I saw it was following an S curve that was turning over towards the ceiling. And when he reached 91% of the ceiling, he died. Now, of course, there was an epidemic, and many people died, but some people did not die. And I claim if Mozart was not at the 90%, but he was at the 50% of his productivity curve, he wouldn't have died because he would have so much reason to live that he would have probably provided enough resistance for that disease, whatever the disease was, and not die. Mozart is interesting because when he entered beyond the midpoint, when his curve starts slowing down, that's a very interesting time that he tampered with different kind of music, as if he felt that he was exhausting the established kind of music. He has the so-called dissonant quartet. The dissonant quartet was composed in 1785, which is as he was the rate of production was declining, and it falls on what I call the fall season of his cycle. We have the cycle, the life cycle of a person can be like the seasons of in nature. So we have the summer season when you're producing full strength, and you have the fall season when you start realizing that the production is becoming lower. So when he entered the fall season, he tried to compose the dissonant quartet, but that didn't go down because of the audience. I mean, it was too soon, and that's the kind of music Bartók created 150 years later. I mean, people were not ready for that kind of music, so the grain didn't find fertile ground, and the new process did not start growing because. But it's interesting to see that he instinctively felt he had to do something different. He felt that he was exhausting the niche that he was cultivating.
So, in other words, we as humans, we reach a point where in our lives we've pretty much done everything we're going to do in our particular career, and people who retire, that's why you see so many people who retire and they say, okay, now it's my golden years.
Die soon afterwards. That's a
exactly.
very dangerous thing, yes. If you retire, you can do something else. You don't have to retire and do nothing. Or you can have a second curve or a third curve, or very often curves succeed one another. But it has to be a different species. It cannot be. It has to be differentiated. The new activity cannot be the previous activity with a whistle on it.
Well, it's interesting that when I read your book, I understood my father completely, who was a career Army officer, and his whole service was food service in the military, his battlefield commission in the Battle of the Bulge. But then by the time he retired, he was chief of food service for the Army. He then extended his curve by teaching commercial food to children, high school age, for 12 years.
Well, that's different. That's different enough.
And then after that, he retired from that. When he was younger, he used to be a truck driver. He began teaching defensive driving for people who get in trouble driving their cars for the government. And
that's also different enough, yeah.
And I think by the time that ended, he had used himself up. He had used everything that he was about.
Yeah.
And there were no other S-curves, no other extensions. The point I bring that up is that we're all on this kind of S-curve, and people have to stop thinking about retiring and thinking about how they can extend their S-curve further.
That's right. What's going to be the next activity? What's going to be the next growth process that will start from the beginning and will give a new chance for a new capacity for growth? It may not be as big. It may be a smaller niche.
Right.
But okay, so be it. I mean, it's going to be another cycle.
So, Dr. Modis, are there, now with maybe a better understanding of what S-curves are and how we can affect them and how they guide probably the things around us more than we might have suspected, are there any trends or new curves that you've observed since the last edition of your book that you could update us on?
Yes, there are. Let me see. To me, what's striking now, just a few last words on the energy issue, is that the switch from these what I call four long directions of windmill farms and biofuels and this solar. I just realized recently that to the nearest whole number, it says, the percentage of the world's energy that comes from wind turbines today is zero. That means it's less than 0.5% how much energy we get out of windmill farms and wind turbines. And there are many activities that have been going on, which I can see already turning over. That is, people are moving away from from supporting in the beginning and from becoming interested in this wind energy. From the green agenda is facing a crisis, particularly as economic climate is tightening up the belts all around. People realize that this was a luxury that is not justified because it cannot possibly provide in a substantial way an energy source on the global market. So there's several, they're not new, what they are turnarounds of trends. I was in a meeting in Germany recently, and I saw these rooftops with solar panels that are selling and big business. And when I tried to question them why they're doing it, they said only because the government was giving money and there were people who wanted to buy because of the fashion. But in reality, the benefit that comes from it cannot justify the process. So as long as there's enough money around, you indulge in these activities, but when you sober up, you cut them up. So the new trends I see is coming back to basics as far as energy goes.
So Dr. Modis, excuse me, so while that trend is being, let's say, subsidized, or that little mini S-curve in the, say, green energy was being subsidized, it was then at the same time, I guess to some degree, it was holding down another energy source that naturally wants to be more utilized.
Absolutely.
So what was that? What is that source?
Holding down is studying the nuclear energy more. The nuclear technology has remained behind in the technology of the 70s because no funding, no studies, no research has been done in improving in a substantial way the safety, the ways of the waste disposal. All these things have not been studied because we've been studying solar panels. So that's a really dangerous. I mean, people could argue that the Japanese disaster it was being given on other studies, which are kind of far-fetched.
Very interesting.
Interesting. You have a book out, Theodore, of your predictions past and how well they have turned out, to the point where you actually have a book published on that. What is that name?
Yeah, it's Predictions 30 Years Later, it's called.
Right. It's amazing how many of your predictions have come dead.
Yeah, I was surprised myself. That's why I feel good about doing the book.
And I also talked you into years ago writing a book called the S-Shaped Walk Down Wall Street. And that's
well, I tried to bring the S-curves to the stock market because what you need to do there is you have to look at physical variables. You cannot look at prices. The prices will come out as a byproduct. And then what I looked there was the share volume and the share value exchanged in the stock market. Because value and volume are physical. Share volume is pieces of the company, shares. If you buy it, somebody else cannot buy it. So it's limited. And so is the dollar. If you get an investor's dollar on one stock, he cannot put it on another stock. But the price can fluctuate unpredictably. So what I tried to do in that book is study the evolution, predict, if you want, forecast the evolution of the share volume and the share value, and then take the ratio of those two to get the price out.
interesting. Now that book is still available. They should go to.
Yes, that's the book I'm going to try to put on an application eventually.
That's fantastic. I want people to go to your website because what was that? Had that written down?
There are many other articles, interesting articles about the singularity, about the newsletter. I used to have the newsletter. Remember that all the archives of my old studies are there, and it's interesting from time to time to look at all the forecasts.
Absolutely.
How did energy look in the 60s, in the 90s, and so on?
Well, that website is www.growth, GROWTH, hyphen dynamics, DYNAMICS.com.
That's right.
And I'm thinking back to when Cindy and I went to Switzerland to have dinner with you, because your book moved me so much. And I sat there and I asked you a question, a pointed question, and I was very surprised at the answer. And I said, Theodore, what would you do if your doctor came to you and said you are diagnosed with AIDS? And you said, I would tell him that he was dead wrong.
Well, yeah, I would do another test.
But it was interesting how you predicted that disease would only be no more.
The S-curve disease was the AIDS forecast was one of the big success stories, because at the time I was writing the book, people were talking about the extinction of the human species. They were afraid that this would be the end, and it only took 2% of all deaths. I mean, it was a very micro niche, very well contained micro niche. And in fact, now it's even coming down because of effective medication. But it followed the S-curve very, very accurately.
Well, you went into the probabilities of if the doctor had given you a positive return.
That's right.
You went into the probabilities.
False positive identification. And one test is not enough.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're pushing up on an hour now, and I could talk to you all day. I think this has been fantastic, and we can do this again. I don't think we covered.
Oh, it would be my pleasure. In fact, come to Lugano. You know, I'm in Lugano these days.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Lugano is one. That's where all of the kids go to have a good time.
That's right.
But no, it's like my children went there, and you can do flying, you can do everything you can think of.
Sailing. I'm doing sailing.
Sailing now.
Yeah.
It's beautiful there.
It is beautiful. It's the Mediterranean part of Switzerland. It's below the Alps, so we have sun.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Well, go to Dr. Modis' website. I think you'll find it very interesting there. And any questions you have, Theo, what your email is? Give me that. Give me your email.
Well, it is in there. It's Modis at gmail.com.
Okay, tmodis, MODIS at gmail.com.
It's in my website.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you just got to give out all the information you can, because some people may go to the website and just email you. But this was fantastic. I want to thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking to you guys.
Get the book Prediction. Who's ever listening here, you'll enjoy it. It'll change the way you look at things in the world. And when in fact, you'll probably turn off the news, and you won't have to watch CNBC or anything else.
That's right.
You know, you'll have a good understanding of the way the world works. Theodore, thank you very much again, and we'll be back to you. All right, buddy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.